You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize. I'm your host, David Russell, along with my co-host, David Paulman. What's up, David?
How's it going, Russell?
Another day, man. How you been?
Oh, I've been really good. The whole family is out for a couple weeks, so I got the house to myself, and I'm just catching up on sleep, and it's nice.
Yeah, you reading our textbook for school?
I'm supposed to be. I was trying to, and I just couldn't get into it. I don't know. Something about N.T. Wright writing on the problem of evil was just not connecting with me. I'll give it a shot again, though.
Yeah, it's not bad. I've gotten through the first couple chapters. It gets better as it goes. The first part's kind of boring, though. It took me a while to get through.
Have you tried the other one, The Empire of Darkness?
I have started that one. It's actually pretty neat. You know, if you're looking at it from a story form.
It looked like it was independently published or something like that, so I wasn't stoked about it.
Yeah, and it took about 12 days to get to my house, so that was an interesting little run around with the USPS there, but I finally got it. Anyways, we've got an awesome debate for everybody tonight. We've got James Goodwin and Caleb Jackson here. They're going to be talking about, is Christianity true? Gentlemen, let's start with James. James, I found you on atheist versus Christian debate, not because there's two of these Facebook pages. One's theist and the other one's Christian. So I found him on atheist versus Christian, I believe, and he was promoting his new YouTube channel. So James, why don't you tell us a little about the Honest Atheist?
Alrighty. So what is the Honest Atheist? Well, it's just a YouTube channel, man. I've just recently started that because I was a pastor for 4 years, and prior to that, I completed a Bachelor of Theology in New Zealand, and I went through a process of deconverting, and this was a massive epistemological change for me, and this whole area of religion and atheism, whatever I might claim to be, is still my deepest passion, and it's still something that really interests me. I love having conversations, and I'm about having honest conversations too. So, I really enjoy engaging with people and discussing my story with people and hearing from others who have similar stories. And I'm looking forward to being here today, man. And I'm excited about this topic today. And I think it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And you're from across the pond, are you? From way across the pond.
Yeah. I grew up in New Zealand, but at present I'm living just outside of Melbourne on a small farm in a very small town. So
that's
but I'm about an hour and a half outside of Melbourne, so it's it's a good spot.
Out in the old outback, man. Right. He's probably shut up. It's not the outback. No,
it's not really.
Yeah, I know. So next we've got Caleb Jackson. So Caleb, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm currently an author. I'm at a university right now studying political science communication. So ironically, nothing to do with theology, but it's always been a topic that's interested me. So the published book that I have right now is about the resurrection of Jesus, and that was about 250 pages. And that was just a topic that I found was really interesting. And I had read other books about it, but there was none that really satisfied me. So I'm like, you know what? If you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. So I think that's always a good mentality to write your own stuff. And now I'm currently working on a book about theodicy, which for those who don't know is solutions to the problem of evil. So I go through and I rank the counter arguments and what I think is the best theodicies, and I go into a little bit about hell and divine hiddenness and stuff like that. So it's really an amalgamation of a lot of different subjects, but I wrote that during a time in my life where I actually had two grandfathers that passed away a month between each other, so it was a very depressing time in my life. So that's kind of what motivated me to write that, and that should probably be out in a couple months. I don't want to give an exact date. And I've also submitted an article to the Journal of the New Testament, which is under peer review right now, so I'll have to wait back and see if they accept it and publish it. But that's on Matthew 28's version of the resurrection, and I go into why I think that's based on an early tradition. But so I do have a little bit of a publishing background in that sense, but I do admire that James can put stuff on a blog and videos, because I think that really reaches out to more people and is a lot more accessible to a lot of people. I'm sure we'll have a good conversation today.
All right, David, why don't you tell us what we're going to do now?
Yep. All right. So we're going to be debating the topic, is Christianity true? That's pretty broad, but I'm sure we're going to zero in on some specific aspects of that. Format, if you are a regular viewer here, then you should be pretty familiar with this. We got a 10-minute opening statement. I believe we're starting with Caleb because he'll be offering the affirmative. And then we'll have two 10-minute opening statements, and then we're just going to let him have a free back and forth, at which point just Russell and I will only get involved if for some reason we need to. So, Caleb, we're going to turn this over to you. Your 10 minutes begin whenever you start talking.
All right. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thanks to everyone who helped arrange this debate, both the Davids and James. I hope this can bring about a meaningful discussion. Before explaining what I'll be arguing in favor of, let me clarify what I will not be doing. I will not criticize James's deconversion. As his YouTube channel indicates, I assume he is an honest person who was originally sincere in his faith. People have told him, quote, "You never had any faith to begin with." I would like to apologize on behalf of my fellow Christians because I believe that statement to be naive. I will actually agree with James here. I think he was and is sincere, and I'm assuming that he is genuinely searching for truth. James writes that, quote, "Atheists are humans too," end quote, and I absolutely agree. Hopefully we can have a meaningful conversation, as humans should. With all of that out of the way, today I'll be arguing why I believe Christianity is, in all probability, true. Now, when I say the word true, I'm not referring to a strictly mathematical proof. I will not argue that Christianity is true without any reasonable doubt whatsoever, only that it is most probably true than false. For Christians to be established, for this to be probably true, one needs to focus on the core doctrines of Christianity, what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity. This includes the existence of God as well as the deity and resurrection of Christ. So other secondary and tertiary doctrines relating to the Old Testament, biblical inerrancy, the Trinity, and so forth will not be relevant to the question of Christianity's validity, and thus not relevant for tonight's debate topic. The first doctrine of Christianity, one that is obviously required, would be the existence of God. Obviously, various arguments have been given over millennia, although we will only have time to discuss one in particular here. I will be using a variation of Leibniz's contingency argument. Now, bear with me, this might get a little bit technical for some people. Now, Gottfried Leibniz asked the famous question, why is there something rather than nothing? We intuitively have explanations to why things exist. I exist because of my parents. This computer exists because it was made in a factory. There seems to be only two logical explanations for why any particular thing exists. One, either its existence depends on something else and is therefore contingent, or two, it exists by the necessity of its own nature. In other words, it is impossible for it not to exist. This would apply to logical and mathematical truths like 2 + 2 = 4. It just can't not be the case. So, given these options, it is true that either the universe exists contingently on something that transcends it, or it exists necessarily. Most atheists, and I would assume James is probably in this category, would argue that the universe itself exists necessarily. Maybe there's an infinite cycle of Big Bangs, or a multiverse, or quantum fluctuations. However, I think there are good reasons to think that the universe is not necessary. In order for something to be necessary, it cannot be contingent or have contingent qualities. So a necessary thing cannot come from a previous state, and thus can't be intrinsically changing or originally temporal. It also cannot be contingent on space or spatial location, and is therefore non-spatial. The universe, however it is defined, does not meet this criteria. It is constantly changing and constantly evolving. Even if all of existence is made up of infinite changes and chains of events, all of these events are technically contingent and thus cannot be necessary. There must be a primary cause. It's important to note that I don't mean a literal first cause as in before. This works with an infinite set. Rather, Leibniz argued that even an eternal contingent universe would need some explanation. So then, if the universe is contingent, it must be contingent on something. Ultimately, all contingent things must be based on a necessary foundation. As discussed previously, this necessary thing cannot be changing, must be timeless, and cannot be contingent on space. This leaves us with a non-spatial, timeless, changeless ultimate state. But then how does a timeless and changeless cause give rise to a temporal and changing effect? The only conceivable way is if this state is personal and can will for the change to occur. It is akin to a man sitting motionless in a chair for all of eternity before deciding to stand up for the first time. If we replace the man with a non-personal thing, like let's say a ball, then there will never be an event, time, or change. A personal being is required. Therefore, we have a necessary, timeless, changeless, non-spatial, and personal being, and as Thomas Aquinas would say, this we know as God. Therefore, a naturalistic explanation of creation leads to an ultimately contingent view of existence, which itself is unexplained. Naturalism simply cannot account for this factor, in my opinion. Now, James has listed two main reasons he rejects theism in Christianity, which are as follows. 1, it is convoluted, and there are, to quote him, hundreds of issues, end quote, with the arguments. 2, all theistic arguments are circular and presuppose God's existence. Now, I have presented an argument for theism and will present an argument specifically for Christianity in just a moment. James's first point, that Christianity is convoluted, seems to be a very broad statement that I don't think he has given specific arguments for in his online and written work. James's second point, that all theistic arguments presuppose God, is simply mistaken in my judgment. The argument I presented here today does not start with the premise God exists. Rather, it is meant to be deductive. It starts with various premises that, if true, lead to the conclusion that God exists. Having argued for the existence of God, I will move on to my second point. In order for Christianity to be true, we must establish that the Christian God exists. This does not necessarily require the existence of the Trinity, as there are Unitarian Christians. It requires at minimum the divinity of Jesus Christ and his resurrection over the dead. Proper background information needs to be established. For one, Jesus made claims that he believed himself to be either divine or messianic, or at least a prophet in some way. Even given the small portion of sayings by the Jesus Seminar, Jesus seemingly did make very provocative claims and deeds. According to James Charlesworth, the majority of New Testament scholars, whether conservative or liberal, agreed that Jesus of Nazareth performed what people believed to be miracles, faith healings, and exorcisms. It is generally agreed that Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, as this is referenced in multiple independent sources like Mark, the Q source, and John, among others. The Son of Man was presented as a heavenly figure who was given authority to rule over the earth in Daniel 7. Thus, we have good reasons to believe that the historical Jesus saw himself as a prophet of God, enlightened with authority, and believed that he had the power to perform miracles in God's name. This brings us to our third and final point, the resurrection. I have written extensively on this topic in my published work, and so I will not go into great detail here. James has said that, quote, whether Jesus rose from the dead or not, I don't know. If you want to prove to me that Jesus rose from the dead, then prove it, end quote. I think that the weight of the historical evidence presents a very compelling case for the probability of the resurrection, especially in conjunction with the background evidence that I presented prior. Jesus, having been executed for these claims and deeds, was apparently seen by both his disciples and his enemies after his death. While it is common for believing individuals to have visions of the deceased, early Christians came to a much stranger belief. They held that Jesus had not just been a ghost, not just been an exalted saint, but instead bodily raised from the dead by God. Many people try to use what's called a minimal facts approach to the resurrection, and I'm sure that James has heard of it before. Instead, I'm going to work backwards. I think that examining the reasons why these first century Jews came to believe something foreign and so peculiar is a compelling place to start. Why would someone come to sincerely believe that someone, against all expectation, could be raised from the dead? This remarkable belief, as well as additional factors like the empty tomb and post-mortem appearances, requires historical explanation. The appearances of Jesus after his death are held to a scholarly consensus in academic circles. Likewise, Mark Waterman states that, quote, not a few, but rather a majority of contemporary scholars believe that there is some historical kernel in the empty tomb tradition, end quote. The specific arguments and evidence for both of these claims has been laid out in my published work and will in all likelihood be discussed in the cross-examination portion of this debate. So I believe that granting the background information provided prior, including God's existence and Jesus' claims to be affiliated with this God, which I argued for, The hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead in order to vindicate his radical claims is probably true when put in conjunction with the historical evidence. Other naturalistic theories fail to account for all of the data and cannot make predictions that co-align with the historical information presented. The atheist philosopher Anthony Flew has admitted that, quote, the evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It is outstandingly different in quality and quantity, end quote. Robert Cavan, another atheist philosopher, claims that, quote, the evidence for other miracles is weaker than that for the resurrection, end quote. If one is to look at the evidence with both an open mind and in the context of background information provided, then I believe he is rational affirming that Christianity is indeed true. Therefore, in conclusion, there are good reasons to think that God's existence and God's actions to raise Jesus from the dead are more probably true than false, and thus Christianity is more likely to be true than false. Thank you for listening. I hope we can expand on these ideas in the discussion.
All right, thank you, Caleb. We're going to turn this over to James for your 10-minute opening statement.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to speak as fluently as my opponent here, but I will put forward a collection of ideas and an argument, which I will perhaps say that the lack of present-day evidence for the claim that Christianity is true, in fact, proves that it is not true, and that the Christian claim itself, more specifically, the New Testament claim about the proof of God's Spirit and power, and the lack of evidence for that in today's world does in fact prove that Christianity is not true, and probably that Jesus didn't rise from the dead. In Gotthold Ephraim Lessing's work on proof of spirit and of power, he begins with the theological predicament, that being, this proof of the spirit and of power no longer has any spirit or power, but has sunk to the level of human testimonies of spirit and power. Because of this problem, Lessing questions, how is it to be expected of me that the same inconceivable truths which 16 to 1800 years ago people believed on the strongest inducement should be believed by me to be equally valid on an infinitely lesser inducement? This is the problem of when we look at the historical Jesus, if any of you have studied that. And I myself have studied that. Yet modern scholarship, sophisticated scholarship, biblical scholarship, from contemporary evangelical voices like Kierkegaard, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Michael Polanyi, Murray Ray, argue that the best evidence for the reality of God is in fact seen where the human being would have an encounter of power and of the Spirit with the charismatic Christ. This is very true of the Bible and the claim of the New Testament by both Jesus, by both Paul, and the New Testament writers, in fact. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4:20, for the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but of power. He says in 1 Corinthians 12:4 that there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are a variety of ministries, the same Lord. And he goes on to say that there are gifts like wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, effecting of miracles, prophecy, the distinguishing of spirits, various kinds of tongues, and the interpretation of tongues. In the Gospel of John, there is this theme of signs, essentially miracles Jesus performed which fulfilled Old Testament themes concerning Israel and the surrounding nations. Jesus changed water into wine. He healed those who were crippled and sick in this narrative. He healed a man who was born blind. He resurrected an embalmed corpse from the dead. He multiplied food, feeding 5,000 people, walking on water, and more. John is also a gospel which commissions the disciples to enact the same or similar works. In fact, he says that the disciples or believers of Jesus will do greater works than him. This is the claim of the New Testament, that the evidence for the claim of Christianity will be seen in the lives of Christians and believers. What concerns me about this is that this, in fact, is not seen. And the claim of modern day evangelicals is not proven. But the claim of Lessing, who was in fact a Christian, he'd more likely today probably be someone like an agnostic or an atheist. But that claim still holds true, which was made in the early to late 18th century, that this proof of the Spirit and of power, it doesn't have any spirit and power. It's sunk to the level of just testimonies and people claiming that these things happen. This was possibly one of the reasons why I deconverted, because I tried to live a life according to this gospel, according to the New Testament claims. I genuinely believed that I would see these things, that there would be evidence for the resurrection, that there would be evidence for the Spirit. I prayed for hundreds of people. I've prayed for cripples. I've prayed for people who are severely deformed. And not once was there a miracle. Not once was there any present day evidence for this resurrection. And I'll note again that evangelicals, clearly, like solid Christians who are right up there with in terms of Christian thinking, argue that there should be an encounter, some kind of encounter of power and of the Spirit. This is not only true for me, but it's true in the lives of many others. For example, and I've changed the names, Anastasia says, my journey was fairly similar. Apart from becoming a pastor, although I believed I could have easily gone that way if I wanted. This led me down to the path of Israel-only full preterism and a variety of other things. But he basically said that this whole thing just crumbled before my eyes as I realized that Christianity, also like the other religions, was false and mythological. Another testimony is from Jessica, who says, thanks for sharing your story. I felt this way for probably 10 years. The feeling perhaps felt agnostic, almost like as if pushing it to the side type thing. I've been doing my own research and asking for recommendations, also most just researching Google atheists and authors and different kinds of research, but this has helped me a great deal. Once again, thank you for your story, and seeing this has helped me too. Another from Jeff, hey, I was a theology student and then an overseas missionary for 2 years. I gave every inch of my being to God in multiple countries, but felt abandoned and stressed that God didn't follow up on his scriptural promises. I'm now heavily agnostic, following a very difficult, mentally exhaustive deconstruction. Thanks for your honesty. Your experience is very similar to me. I'm still struggling 5 years after leaving full-time ministry. I'd be keen for a chat sometimes, he says. My claim today is, if the resurrection is true, then where is the evidence for the resurrection in today's world? If you want to prove Christianity is true, then present some present-day evidence, not just written evidence, because I actually accept that the Bible is a historical document. I accept the majority of scholarship and things that surround, New Testament thinking. And my claim is that just because something sounds good and it's compelling and it feels right historically, it doesn't mean that that claim's true. And there is a clear failure on part of the Christian claim, whereby it's not seen in today's world. And I'll finish by saying a close friend of mine went overseas to participate in Heidi Baker's ministry. She's a popular Christian evangelist who supposedly moves in the spirit of power. You could look her up on Google if you need to. This friend spent thousands of dollars going there. She moved there with her husband. They sold their car. They left everything in the pursuit of this Christ-driven life. But like the example above, there was nothing to be seen. There was no present-day power. There was no present-day move of the Spirit. It was just pretty much charitable works that were going on. And the claims of the movement of the Spirit and power that were happening overseas, as you might hear in many different claims of missionaries, was just a matter of talk. And I find that a lot of that's all really Christianity is and has become. It's a matter of talk. Look at us now. We're having a talk about it. Show me a demonstration of the Spirit and power. Show me a demonstration of God, and you'll save thousands. So that's my claim. I've got more to say, but we can have a conversation about that.
Yep, we're going to transition then at this point to the back and forth. I'm going to let Caleb lead here, and, I trust that you guys will be gracious. And, I think Russell and I will just keep back and let you guys talk.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so that was, I think both of us had a lot of stuff to unpack there, so I'm not sure we'll be able to cover everything. So I guess we can just do this as a Q&A, or I can soften up a couple points. Oh yeah, one thing I did want to say
sure.
is, I know you have a charismatic background, right, James? Or I don't know if it was Pentecostal or Episcopalian, but
no, it was. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and at about the age of 10, we joined a Baptist church, and I was heavily involved there as a child, spending all my time basically for 4 to 5 years. So I also was trained in an evangelical college, and I've studied at the University of Otago under evangelical scholars. So yeah, I would say what my background is. I'm fairly, as a pastor, I was fairly adaptable. I'd worked in the Baptist church. I'd worked in the charismatic Anglican church. And the Anglicans here in Melbourne are not Episcopalian like they are in the States. They are solidly evangelical, and that's Australia-wide, basically, except for Western Australia. So my background is evangelical, I would say, with some charismatic roots there.
okay. I brought that up because you did mention a lot about gifts and spirits and miracles, which I guess makes sense given that cultural context that you were familiar with when studying
For sure, yeah.
theology. Yeah. But I don't know if I would say that's necessarily, and you did cite some scriptural verses, but I mean, I'm sure you know as well as all of us that like many, if not most denominations are, well, I don't know if I'd say most, but a good portion are cessationists, where they don't necessarily believe that works or spirits in that way even continue on to today. I'm not defending that position.
But like, isn't that just so convenient?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, and again, I said I'm not defending that because I was going to bring up a couple other points. But I don't know, you did give a lot of anecdotal evidence, which I appreciate, but it's not that I don't, I mean, obviously when I'm talking about testimony, that's all anecdotal. But, I think when,
sure.
I think
these testimonies were about the lack of testimony. They weren't about, so they were anecdotal, but they weren't anecdotal in the sense that an anecdotal example is usually used as something that would point to truth. They point to something where there is a lack of truth, and there's a difference there.
Sure, yeah. But I think you and I would both agree that preferably data and statistics is more admired than anecdotal evidence if it's available. Obviously, you don't always have that, but
for sure, yeah, I absolutely agree.
Right, yeah. So I think that it's a very common thing to say like, oh, there's no evidence, and while it is true that we don't hear about stuff like that every day, because if it happened every day, then it wouldn't be miraculous. I would
Yes. Yeah.
contend the fact I would probably dispute the fact that it doesn't happen at all today. I mean, I don't know if you've read or heard of Craig Keener's book on miracles, about 1,200 pages, and he documents. He has like X-rays and medical stuff, and I'm not saying that all of those have to be true, because you need to look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I did read the examples you gave in your book, particularly about the lady who was blind and her husband was a pastor, and he prayed for her, and she was healed right up till the point of death, basically, with little reduction in sight due to old age.
Yeah, what do you think about that? And I think that was, I think, in the journal for I don't remember the exact title, but it was in it was like in a legit. I wouldn't just call it testimony. It was in a peer-reviewed medical journal. I mean, that's probably the best kind of evidence you can get for something like that.
And I appreciate that. But is that it? Like just because I give a testimony of something, is that like the evidence? Just do you know what I'm saying? What you're saying is this is data.
Well, I mean, it is if doctors diagnosed it and confirmed that it happened. I mean, that's typically how medical research works. I mean, unless I'm not proposing she sneakily was taking medicine on the side or something, but from the data that the doctors gathered, she didn't just walk up and tell them that and they wrote it down like, okay, I mean, when you get published in a journal, you have to go through rigorous review and stuff. So they had, and if you've actually, I don't know if you've read the actual article, but they like tested her site beforehand and after. And I'm not saying that's definitive proof, but I think that's a good place to start. And so, and again, I don't even care that much about this particular point because I ultimately am agnostic on the question of cessationism. I don't really think it matters ultimately, but I think that's good. I think there is contemporary evidence that stuff like that does happen from time to time. I'm not saying that faith healings are legitimate in general, because I know that those things can be psychosomatic and faked. So you have to look at these on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Just in regards to your argument, you started by talking about the reality of the universe existing, and that there was probably some kind of cause, and that we would both agree there. I agree that the universe exists, that we're all here.
That would be a while to debate if we didn't agree on that point.
And I'm definitely not here representing the Big Bang Theory or anything like that. But like this conversation, this debate is about whether Christianity is true. And you've put forward an argument. You spend a few minutes on that. I'm not sure how that is a foundation to whether Christianity is true. Because the claim of Christianity is that Jesus came. Jesus was God the Son within the complexity of the Trinity. And within God's self, God chose to send God's Son to become a human being. And God's Son and I'll be fair to the evangelical claim. I'm not going to spin off a version of some atheist version of the gospel. I'll be true to what the text basically puts forward and Christians believe. So God's Son came in the form of a human being both fully God and fully man. He did what he did. He made various promises. He died for the sins of humanity. And he rose from the dead with the promise that there'd be the outpouring of the Spirit and a present day reality of Spirit and power for the believers. That is the main theme of the gospel, that there would be power and of the Spirit, and that this is not present in our reality now. So I'm wondering how you can defend that claim. I'll temper that by saying I actually accept that the gospel accounts are historical. I'm not saying that everything in those accounts happened. It's a historical document. I accept that. There's no problem with that. I haven't got no problem with that, but I still can't see why that points to the reality of Christianity being true. If it's not true in today's world, and the majority of science and reasonable thinking would point otherwise to that fact.
Okay, so there was a lot in there. So first of all, just to bring it back to the contingency argument I gave, to clarify, the reason I gave that, because you're right that a general theistic argument is not evidence for Christianity, but I wanted to establish the background evidence that there is likely a God and that Jesus affiliated himself with this God. Because if there was no God, the probability that Jesus was God and raised from the dead is zero. I mean, I don't think that would be controversial to say. I'm not arguing that Jesus rose naturally from the dead. I think that's impossible. I think that God intervened and raised him from the dead.
I agree. I think those arguments are stupid. And I think the people who make them are being really unreasonable and ridiculous in their critique of the Gospels. It's madness. I've never liked them, and I still don't like them.
Wow, that's nice coming from you. I had a whole page of notes on the Gospels, but I don't even have to use them. So thanks about that. Yeah, but the resurrection argument doesn't even require that the Gospels are generally reliable. I mean, that's why I mentioned I didn't use them in a more facts argument, but a lot of people do, and that's we could assume that most people don't think that the story in Matthew with the guards in front of the tomb. Most people don't think that's historical, and that's fine. That doesn't really affect the case.
Do you mean the guards with the angel?
Well, they see the angel, yeah, but the fact that there were guards in front of the tomb so the disciples wouldn't steal the body, like most people don't think that's historical, and I'm granting that for the sake of argument.
No. I would say that would have likely occurred, given the commotion around the life of Jesus, as per the documents state. But
sure,
that they saw an angel, probably not.
Right, yeah, I'm not defending that anyone saw an angel. I was just saying that some things we could grant some things probably weren't true, and that wouldn't, I'm not saying I personally believe that, but just for the sake of argument, and that's not the case that I'm trying to make. So, but I think that with the...
but what is the case you're trying to make?
Yeah, so I'm glad I could get to that. So I think that the evidence for the resurrection primarily goes around, I did emphasize the fact that these people came to a very non-Jewish belief, which is even crazy in today's standards, but it was certainly back then, that he had been bodily raised from the dead, which is very strange. And when people do see dead relatives occasionally, whether it's ghosts or they have hallucinations or whatever, but they don't conclude that the corpse is walking out of its tomb. They say that it's a ghost in heaven, right? So the question is, why would someone come to such a belief? And I would they were talking about N.T. Wright at the beginning of this. I would take N.T. Wright's stance that I think that the best explanation is that there was both an empty tomb and bodily appearances of Jesus. Like an empty tomb by itself wouldn't lead to that belief. It would lead to belief that the body had been misplaced, which is mentioned in John. And appearances by themselves without an empty tomb would just convince them that he was a ghost. So I think that having those two together, and I think there's independent arguments as well, not just that one, but there's, I'm sure that the women witnesses and the fact that Jews actually reburied the bodies after a year, which would make the empty tomb falsifiable. There's a lot of different points on that. But I don't think historically there's good reasons to deny that there probably was an empty tomb and there probably were appearances of Jesus, which that combination led them to believe that he had been bodily raised from the dead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So, but I'm a little bit confused about your argument because you've written this book on the resurrection, but your conclusion actually contradicts your argument. Is your argument that Christianity is true because Jesus lived and rose from the dead?
I'm saying that increases the probability. That makes it most probably true if it is the fact that Jesus was raised from the dead by God and vindication of his claims to be a prophet or divinely affiliated.
Yeah.
Which part are you talking about?
Why do you say that despite all of this research, the ultimate answer to Jesus' resurrection will likely remain in agnosticism?
Right, yeah, so that's a good point. So the majority, well, I would say probably most scholars, and I think I have a quote of like, we can't know, would be agnostic. They would say, yes, these facts are probably true, but we just don't have an explanation. A lot of them will say hallucinations or other things, but there's plenty of issues with all of those. So when I said that, I mean that I don't think we can ultimately know, or I don't think there will be a historical explanation that all scholars will agree on, and they'll all say, "Oh yes, we agree that Jesus rose from the dead." So when I was saying that, I was talking about scholarly views on it, that I don't think scholarship will ever give a definitive answer for this is what happened, because it's such a radical thing to say.
Yeah, it is a very radical claim. So is the likely conclusion of this historical evidence one where you would be left in a bit of agnosticism?
Well, if you mean ultimately, like, can I be 100% sure? I would say no, but I would say that it's the same level as far as, like, can we know that Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by Brutus, right? How do we know that? Well, there's testimony of people who reported it at the time. Or can we know that Jerusalem was destroyed or that Socrates drank hemlock? I think using that historical methodology, we can come to it about the same degree of certainty. Obviously, is it possible there was some conspiracy that all of those things could have been faked? It's possible. I don't think it's likely. So it could be how we're defining agnosticism as well. But
yeah, I've read not all of your book, but portions of it, and in my opinion, you've presented a recapitulation of the Christian claim,
mm-hmm.
and you've basically come to the conclusion that this is a historical document. And you even say whether Jesus bodily rose from the dead or not, I don't know. Okay, so that's something you've said in your book. In your conclusion, which should be the summation of all of your work. And we're left in a sense, and with this theme of the only way to know this for sure, or the only thing we can give is our personal faith towards this evidence. Would you agree that that's?
I don't think I used the words personal faith, but at least I don't.
You did kind of allude to that,
okay.
Because you talk about it being something that's unfalsifiable.
Well, yeah. So that the unfalsifiable was referring to.
Sorry, just no, I'm not trying to. Sorry, just to finish that thought, you say in italics, no amount of evidence or empiricism would convince them that God exists. So you're saying here it is. It's an unfalsifiable claim, and the only way that one can really believe this is to believe it by faith, because you're saying essentially this claim, you're acknowledging and you're being honest, like I'm trying to be honest. You're saying we're left with a sense of being agnostic towards this historical claim, even though you think it's a compelling argument, but we're still left there. And then you quote Jesus. Jesus himself stated they would not be convinced even if someone were to rise from the dead. So we're left with the same claim of Christianity, the same argument that Christians or theists and atheists or agnostics have with one another, that Christians just simply believe this by faith. There is evidence. It leaves us in a place of it's not sufficient evidence though, and it leaves us in a place of, oh, I don't know whether this happened or not, but I'm going to believe it by faith.
Okay. Can I? Okay, I was waiting.
I'll let you talk for a while because I'm.
No, you're good.
It's good to let someone actually, speak their argument out properly. So
right. Yeah. No, I always appreciate when people cite material because it's always good to do research. So to clarify, the part where it says they will not believe, most of that in the context of the passage is referring to other scholars, other people. So although I did say I don't know, I still meant that in a probabilistic sense. And I actually said that in the opening statement of my thing is I'm not here to prove it with 100% certainty. I do think that given what I said with the probability, it's why I gave the contingency argument for God's existence, stuff like that. I think if the premise that God exists is likely true, and if Christ claimed to be affiliated with God, and if Christ rose from the dead, those three things put together make it probable that Christianity is true on the basis that God vindicated Christ by resurrecting him from the dead. So also keep in mind that this was made, or part of this was actually submitted to a conference for an honors program at my college. So I didn't want to make it overly preachy, right? This isn't Lee Strobel's Case for Christ. So to keep it
Yeah,
academic,
and I
professional.
appreciate that this piece of writing is essentially an academic exercise,
Yes.
and you have to be factual and fair.
Yes, thank you. And I didn't want to overwhelm saying, yes, this has to be. I was saying that actually someone asked me this at the conference because it was an online conference because of COVID, obviously. But they said,
Yeah.
like, what do you personally think happened? And I said, well, if you believe miracles are possible, I think the best explanation is that Jesus rose from the dead. If you think miracles are impossible, then you pretty much have to go with another option. And so that would be what I would say. And that is kind of why I was more on the fence in framing the wording. But I do personally believe that, yes, it is more probably true than not because of the background information given and because I think that the evidence is more sufficient in that degree. But did you have a comment on the particular, because I don't know how much of the book you read. I know it's pretty thick and technical, and that you didn't have a very long time to read it, so I can't blame you for skimming it. But like, are there any points in particular that you disagreed on as far as like the evidence? Like I talked about the whole empty tomb, the appearances, and it's very detailed, and I know that it can get a little bit dry at times. But
Yeah, like I'm not here saying I disagree with what's going on in your book or what ideas you're putting forward. I think you make a really good contribution to Christian theology, and
thank you.
you made some really good points there. And one of the things I perhaps perceived to be a little bit of a contradiction was you're making this claim for the let's just say life, death, tomb, and resurrection of Jesus. And throughout your book, you would say the classic line of anyone who's ever studied theology, that both evangelical or contemporary evangelicals and liberals alike agree to this, whether that's about Jesus lived or Jesus did this and whatever. But then you conclude by saying there's a discontinuity or there's a lack of agreement between scholars around the issue of the resurrection. And then you conclude, and as I've already said, in this being left in this state of agnosticism. The other thing you said, which is not a jab at you, but you said someone's writing a 5,000, was it, page?
Gary Habermas is, yeah.
Why does someone need to write a 5,000 page book on whether or not, I know it's he's consolidating.
You can ask him. I don't know.
Debates just like this.
For the record, I think he's referring to Gary Habermas because he's working on a 5,000 page book on it, that's going to be really long. But sorry, go ahead and finish your point.
That will be valuable because we'll be able to say, hey, look, here is all the scholarship.
It better be all the scholarship with length.
Yeah. I'm still back at my point, well, not my point, but Blessing's point, that this is still a matter of words. This is still a matter of conversation, to paraphrase. Where is the present day evidence for the resurrection of Jesus?
Yeah,
and
before you finish that thought, I did want to jump in and kind of change that direction because I think we've covered the resurrection and so forth. But I did want to ask you guys to comment on the encounter that people are supposed to have of the Spirit's power. Is that, can you guys address that? And you can finish your point because it seems like that's what you're going into. And I do want to focus this last part of the debate on this specific area. Is that cool?
Sure.
I think could be a little distracting from whether that proves Christianity is true, because we don't know. Do you know whether Christianity is true? Because, like, I just want to emphasize, like, I'm agnostic about it. And so are you from your book, and within reason. And I think it's fair to say you've done that through a rational exercise, and your conclusion is agnostic. And I understand why you said that, because you've completed the rational exercise.
So we'll let Caleb answer that one real quick. Caleb, are you agnostic on that aspect?
Yeah, so I feel like I don't want to be a broken record, but just to clarify, because I think there's a lot of confusion. So first of all, I'll go back to one point he said earlier. He said that you said most scholars agree on these points, but are agnostic and don't agree on the resurrection. I was saying most scholars agree on like things like Jesus' death, burial, empty tomb, postmortem appearances, but they disagree on the conclusion. So there's agreement on the.
They disagree on the miraculous.
They disagree on the explanation on the resurrection, yes, but not on the factors concerning it. That's what I was trying to say.
So this would go into like Ehrman. This would go into like Ehrman's view that history can't make a definitive claim on miracles, right?
Well, that is Ehrman's view. That's also, I mean, more famously David Hume's view about miracles. And just so I don't avoid your question, I am personally not overly, depending on how one defines agnostic, I don't think we can know with certainty, but I think the probability is much greater than 50%. Richard Swinburne thinks it's as high as 97%. I don't know if I would go that high. I don't think I could put a number on it, but I do think it is more probably true than false. So that is my personal position. The agnostic points were to emphasize the academic level and emphasize that I'm not trying to beat anyone over the head with this in a scholarly environment. So that's why I had made the points about agnosticism. But I personally am not, I would not label it agnosticism for my personal taste. Okay, just to clarify those points up. But we can talk about Hume if you want, unless Russell, you really want to go with the stuff of the Spirit. But I don't. I think both of us. I don't know if James agreed, but that I don't know if that's pertinent to Christianity because they're cessationists, and I don't think that would really matter, even if it was true.
Well, the only reason I wanted to address from James's point of view, because it was a big part of his argument.
Sure.
So I mean, if he could just maybe spend 5 minutes, and then you guys can go off on something else for the last 10 minutes, that'd be fine.
Yeah. So,
I would like us to go there and to discuss this for some time, because I don't really accept that claim of, oh well, there's the cessationist, so that would be unfair to Christianity. Mate, the Spirit is the main claim. This is the age of, apparently the age of the Spirit. So it is like everything in the Christian life has to do with the Spirit. So we should talk about that, and even the cessationists would believe that to be true, and I don't know that in a sense, although they have just a bit of a different spin on it. So I would like to go there, and we should talk about encounters with the Spirit.
Yeah. And I was going to jump in just real quick, James, because there is one question I do want addressed in this is that you're saying it's not there, but what about the people that do claim it is there? I mean, they claim that they have these encounters, and maybe we can address that, but as well. So I just want to throw that in there. You guys can hash it out the way you want to, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll let Caleb answer that real quick, and then you guys can go from there.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, he's right that it depends on how you define spirit. I think most Christians would agree that the Holy Spirit is still around today. I don't think anyone would deny that. As to does the Holy Spirit specifically initiate in things like tongues and healings, that's obviously debated, and that's obviously, there's thousands of Protestant denominations, and many of them, if not the majority of them, I don't think necessarily hold to that view. Not that that makes it right or wrong, because I don't want to do an ad populum fallacy or anything. But personally, I do feel like James is, I don't want to say he's boxed in, but I do think that the environment he's grown up in him makes it seem like that is the only way that could be endeavored within Christianity. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But
yeah, just a quick response to that. I would say I disagree. My exploration of that is actually from the text, because the Bible is riddled with miracles. It's like every gospel author makes a point of saying, "Oh, here's a miracle," or "Here's a sign." That is thematic. If you want to talk about something as being historical, through Acts, through not just the lives of the apostles or the disciples, but also through Christians who were newly converted to Christianity. They too were performing miracles. So that's cessationism falls at the feet of that. So you can't separate this idea of the continuity of the miraculous or the Spirit as giving miracles to the world as something that, and I know you don't necessarily do that, but as something that is not that is not that should what I'm saying is the that should be present today as it was in Acts, which was post Jesus' resurrection and ascension, and as in the Gospels. Yeah.
So, by the way, as a side note, you all are frozen on my screen. I can still hear James, but I don't see any movement. So.
Yeah, you're frozen on mine too. I mean, you just give your response. It'll probably cut back in.
Okay, yeah. As long as you can hear me, that's all that matters.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah, again, I don't think Acts and the Gospels are irrelevant, but cessationists don't claim that they were never able to do it. I think cessationist claims that they ended with the apostolic age. So that would includes Acts, that includes throughout the lifetime of the apostles. Even in I don't know if you've read Contra Celsum, which is written by Origen, but Celsus, who was a Greek opponent of Christianity, remarks that the disciples of Jesus are probably possessed by spirits because they perform miraculous works, right? So I wouldn't say that it's, or at least, yeah, and he's speaking in the 2nd century, I believe. So it may have continued on to some degree, but I believe there are church fathers, and I forget off the top of my head who it was, but there are some who noticed that they were starting to fade out. Probably within, I think, the 4th centuries. It might have been Augustine, or I might just be misremembering that.
Yeah, it's Augustine. He said he didn't even know what tongues looked like at that time.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
That's from the man who cut his penis off. Let's just keep that in mind.
Well, I mean, who is was it Van Gogh who cut his ear off and he was a brilliant artist? So, but maybe that doesn't mean everything. But yeah. Our next debate will be just cutting off anatomy make you a less credible person. But
that's not a debate I wish to enter.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I do think obviously there are plenty of theologians who would I'm sure who are more qualified than I or James combined who would disagree. And there are some who agree to that as well. I know personally some people who are Pentecostals or in that church, but I would disagree with them. Plus, I think the people who, a lot of the times, I won't say all, so I don't know how your specific congregation did it, but even Paul talks about translating them properly, and he's like, it should be a very orderly process. But if you look at, in the United States, we have a church called Bethel, and sometimes they'll speak in tongues, and it's extremely chaotic, and you don't have people properly translating. So even if they do it today, I don't think they're following the rules that St. Paul set forth.
Maybe not. I do want to go to David's question. I'd like to go there about this idea of the Spirit being present. I just want to say, you keep appealing to cessationism. Are you a cessationist? It's okay if you are. Why do you keep appealing to that?
Because I think it's a possible option. I personally don't know. I mean, I think I'd lean towards cessationism, but I do think that miracles occur occasionally. I don't think you can do them on command or anything. But I mean, that's where I give the statistics and some of the journal things, which to be honest, I don't think you really responded to. You kind of just said, "Is that all?" But I don't know if that constitutes as relatively a response. I mean, I think that having medical evidence is the best you're going to get. Actually, in the United States, 55% of doctors claim they have personally witnessed what they would consider to be a miracle. So I think to say that, to take David Hume's approach.
I mean, that's a fairly dubious statement. Like, you give one example, like one, and then you state that, and it's like, oh, well, miracles happen. It's still like, my claim is that's still written evidence. I'm saying, where is the present day reality of the resurrection? And you're claiming to be a cessationist, but to be honest, man, like, cessationism ceased, to have a bit of a pun in there, in the 1940s and 50s. That is no longer a relevant perspective in contemporary evangelical scholarship. And I made that clear in my opening statement, although it was not as eloquent as yours, from voices like, I mean, the development of leaving cessationism behind came from voices like Kierkegaard, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and more presently, Michael Polanyi and Murray Ray and Christopher R.J. Wright, and even more. So I don't know, like, I think just the appeal to cessationism is a bit of a, oh, well, here's this small group of Christians who say that present-day miracles cease, but it's a weak argument, and it's not biblically based. It's not the claim of Christianity. The claim of Christianity is one of spirit and power and an encounter with the charismatic Christ. And I don't see that as being evidenced in today's world. And to speak to the moderator's question of, well, how does one explain people's encounter with the Spirit? Well, as I demonstrated from the New Testament, the claim of the New Testament thinking was that there would be more than just an outpouring, or one might describe it as I've heard hundreds of times, a tingling feeling. There should be more than that, according to the Bible. There should be faith, healing, miracles, which was left broadly open in Paul's theology, prophecy, tongues, and interpretation of tongues. And to be honest, just the only thing that is reasonably demonstrated within the Christian church is this idea of, or this reality of feeling the Spirit and speaking in tongues, which anyone can just make up. You know, like is that it? And some vague prophecies about, oh, I sense you have a great call, and I see your life is going to be like the life of David, and I see you with a sword, and I see you moving in power with the gospel. Do you know what I mean? Like anyone can say this stuff. That is the only present reality of the New Testament claim today, and I find that concerning, and I think a lot of people do as well. People find that concerning today, and there's been video evidence for, God knows how long, but there's been video evidence for so long, and still no one's capturing anything that's reasonably convincing. In fact, I would say the contrary. Any video evidence for any kind of movement of a miracle of God is relatively unconvincing, reasonably unconvincing. So, yeah. And so, in some sense, in response to like the moderator's question, or the host's question, what do I say to this idea of people experiencing the Spirit? Well, so what? Like you get some tingles or some goosebumps, or you feel emotionally overwhelmed by the reality that you've probably hold my tongue there. You've probably messed up in some way. You probably feel guilty. You feel bad about that. And you found this message which feels good, and you're crying, and you're taking that as something that is a move of God, or a move of the Spirit, and it's just not enough. It's just not enough.
All right, well, that's a good answer. I think we'll let Caleb respond to that. and we'll move it into the closing statements here after that.
Yeah, so first of all, let me just say I don't think I said it more eloquently than James because he has an Australian accent, or I'm sorry, a New Zealand accent, and it sounds very good. So
Yeah.
he has that advantage. So as far as people he cited, I don't deny that there's certainly plenty of people who would affirm tongues, but he mentioned people like Kierkegaard as one. But Kierkegaard was a philosopher, not really a theologian. Now, he said some very pertinent things towards theology, no doubt about that. But I think I don't think we can cite him as, not that he's not authority, but there's people like John MacArthur who I don't even agree with on everything, but James White who are definitely not continuationists and who have spoken out against it. So we can both cite people on both sides. And again, I don't think that strictly the biblical evidence you said, which I know you don't even accept. I know you're saying it for the sake of argument because as an atheist you wouldn't accept biblical evidence in that sense. But I don't think that has to pertain, that the interpretation has to pertain to modern day and could not pertain to apostolic. But I don't want to get off track and make this just a cessationist continuationist debate, because as I said, I'm not necessarily a cessationist. I'm saying I don't know, and I don't have a strong horse in the race on that particular issue. I also don't think it really matters, and I know that might be a point of contention, but that's why I laid out in my opening about C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And I don't know if C.S. Lewis believed in tongues or not, but Mere Christianity is the idea that all of the Christian doctrines that hold the main denominations together, which is the divinity of Christ, existence of God, resurrection, and so forth. I don't think that you have to include spirits in there, or else you're going to get rid of a whole bunch of denominations. So I honestly don't think that's overly relevant. And I guess I would ask, if it were true that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and that cessationism is true and that people don't speak in the tongues, would that not make Christianity true, even if he did rise from the dead but just didn't happen to have tongues that continue on? I mean, I just think that that's a very weird position to take.
James, you're muted, bud.
Okay, can I respond to that, and then we can give our statements?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
This is that sounds like a typical cessationist response, and I know that because I worked in a church which had cessationist roots. You keep talking about tongues. I'm not talking about tongues. I'm talking about, where is the demonstration of the Spirit and power in the Christian church? And I don't, but we're still left in that state of agnosticism. You're saying, well, isn't this historical evidence compelling enough? But it's clearly not compelling enough. And most scholars today agree. Most middle of the road, majority of evangelical scholars agree it's not enough. There has to be some kind of encounter. And what I'm saying, that the encounter that we have seen is just simply not enough. So, yeah.
Are we going to closings, or do you like some?
Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it, David? You think we should do the closing statements now? And you can make that response your closing statement if you like.
Yeah, that's
Caleb.
fine. We can do that.
Yeah. I would say we'll go to closings, and feel free to give any responses or last thoughts in that. Just give you maybe 3 minutes.
Am I still frozen, by the way?
A little bit.
Okay, it's fine. It's as long as you can hear me.
Okay, who's going first?
We usually give our second round of opening statements the last word because you're in the negative, and we give the positive opener the first closing statement.
Okay.
So basically, Caleb first and James second.
Okay, you could have started with that. So yeah, I think that we've discussed a lot of points tonight. This was a very fruitful conversation, and James seems like a really nice guy, and hopefully we can do something along these lines sometime. But I think the case that I made for the existence of God has not really gone refuted, and I don't think anyone would object to that, even though it's not overly definitionally proving of Christianity. It is a relevant topic to make, because if God does not exist, then Christianity is by definition false. I'm also glad to see there was not a lot of dispute on Jesus's historical claims, which was my second argument. And for the third point of the resurrection, we heard a lot of back and forth on whether or not one agrees with whether or not one finds evidence compelling. And of course, what you find compelling is inherently subjective. But I do think that given the explanations and given the counter arguments, which I know we didn't really go into discussion here, because I think most of us just kind of conceded it for the sake of the argument, I do think we have good historical grounds. And I would just like to affirm that I do think that that's all my case requires, that even if there is no continuation of the Spirit, which I'm not saying there is or is not, that it does not ultimately matter, and that even if Jesus was raised from the dead, that would be pretty good signs, I would think, from God that this is the right religion, however one takes the interpretation of the feeling of the Spirit. And I don't think that even my arguments in favor that maybe continuation is true, the fact that we do have plenty of documented, not just claims, but miracle and medically documented claims of people being healed instantaneously of incurable diseases through prayer. I don't think we've really heard that much of a response other than just him not being satisfied with it. And I understand that's subjective, but I guess it's like, at what point would the evidence convince you? And if medical evidence isn't going to convince you, and all the documents that Craig Keener has, at what point, other than your own personal experience? And I just think that that's kind of what I get to, that we can't ultimately be sure. And I don't mean that in an agnostic sense. I mean that like people who don't want to accept it. And I'm not saying James is close-hearted or anything like that, but just generally speaking, many people I think don't accept it for philosophical and emotional reasons. But I don't think that they have had technical responses to a lot of the arguments made tonight. So, yeah, thanks for having us on, and this was really fun. So hopefully we both learned a lot from this discussion.
All right, James.
Wonderful. Thanks, Caleb, and thanks for being thanks for not saying that I didn't have enough faith, or that God was simply testing my resilience of faith. I don't want to go over what I've already said. I probably said the same thing 5 times over. But what I want to propose for my leaving thought is that is something for us to consider, that the gospel claim, or the claim of Christians today, is that the gospel is a very confronting reality to the person. And I've thought about this a little bit, and I want to say that what is more confronting is the idea that we're not in communion with a God, that life is not eternal, but is noticeably short, and that this is the one and only life that we do get to live, and that we must take ownership and responsibility for this, knowing that it is particularly short. We're not going to observe the outcome of humanity, of our planet, of future travel. And that is a very confronting reality. It's incredibly confronting to the person who has been, who's grown up in the world where Christianity has had a major influence, where theism has had a major influence, and it's entrenched in our thinking. But science and the theory of evolution contradicts that. Not knowing something like who the hell created the world and this crazy, chaotic planet that is moving and that we live on is uncomfortable. And it is very uncomfortable to stand in a museum like I have, the Melbourne Museum, and look at a collection of 30 to 40 real skulls dating back, like way, way back. It's really confronting. And it's not what we want to hear. And I don't think the gospel is as challenging and as confronting and overwhelming like the reality of science is, and the reality of true reasoners and and exercising real ethics in a real and changing world. And I want to say thanks for having me. And it was a good conversation. I feel challenged, and I'm sure my opponent feels challenged in different ways. Hopefully, on the area of cessationism, if I was to give you advice as a fellow Christian on, say, hey man, drop cessationism, read through the gospel accounts and Acts, and you'll find that's not true to the Christian message. And then you'll probably find that Christian message isn't true, like many of my fellow friends who have reached out to me.
Well, thank you very much there, James. We're getting at the conclusion of our show now, and I just wanted to personally thank both of you guys for coming on. Maybe we can have you on again sometimes. Just some closing remarks on the sensationist aspect. I mean, from what I always understood is that, God still does work today. A lot of the people that were cessationists aren't like Advent cessationists like James White or John MacArthur, but do believe that those miracles had a purpose. I mean, we don't see the Red Sea parting again. I thought that was pretty, so we're not going to see these miracles in the flux that we saw them in Acts or Jesus. I mean, Jesus was vindicating himself. And, even to the John chapter 4, when he said, we're going to do more things. You're going to do more things than I. And I think you nailed it on the head right there, James, because I think Christianity has influenced so much in our cultures today. And I think that, for me, that's a work of the Spirit right there. But that's just my thoughts on it, and maybe who knows. I'm not like I said, I'm not going to go and preach right now. We're at the conclusion, and like I said, I loved you guys coming on. Maybe we can come on and talk about this more sometime on cessationists and how an atheist deals with this type of stuff. I think that's a very awesome aspect of your testimony. I came from your similar background as James did, and it was a hard hurdle for me to really investigate, but I came out on the other side, James. On the other side of the argument. But anyways, guys.
I did too,
hey, so David, you got anything to add?
Oh, I was just gonna say, actually, in defense of Caleb, in my experience, more Christians that I have come across, and certainly more historically, have been cessationists. That is actually, like, if we're talking in terms of like how many Christians there have been historically, yeah, cessationism has definitely been the dominant position. As far as presently, I have no idea what the present statistics on it are, but in my experience, it seems that cessationism is still dominant. But then, yeah, I am in a cessationist denomination. That was I wanted to make
that both of the Davids do a debate on cessationism.
I'm not like a strong advocate of it either. Right. I'm kind of in the agnostic camp with Caleb there, but
it's more prominent in the US, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's also it's rampant. Like I said, I grew up in a church where people were just spouting tongues left and right, man, and you're just sitting there and someone is speaking in tongues in your ear and you're like, whoa, what's this? And it's very prevalent. My wife was listening to some worship music the other day at her mom's church through online because of all this COVID mess, and you can hear people singing in tongues over there. So I'm just like, okay, but there's a lot to that argument, and it was very interesting, guys, and I really appreciate both y'all's views here. And yeah, thanks for coming on. I don't know when we're gonna have our next Raw. That should be coming up in a week or so. PRA Raw. Stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for more debates, ladies and gentlemen. David, is there anything else?
That was it.
All right. Well, you guys have a good night. Thanks for coming, and we are out.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.